Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast, where we're all about commander, data, and dad jokes. I'm Joey Schultz, and I'm joined by my pun-tastic co-host. Whenever he plays against a high-perfect Morcant deck, he's going to remove it just so he can say more like bi-perfect Morcant. It's Matt Morgan.
And then they won't have to wonder why more can't either. So, but yeah, anyway, Joey, I wanted to tell you, I went to a zoo this past weekend, but they only had one dog. And I just need to say, it was a pretty shit zoo.
Whew, I'm really hoping that the YouTube algorithm doesn't interpret that as a potential other type of word that then gets us demonetized. You're playing with fire.
Everybody loves those dogs. They're so pretty.
They are very pretty dogs, actually, with a deeply unfortunate name.
I'm very happy to report, though, it was a petting zoo, so I got to pet it.
Hey, okay, fantastic. And also, YouTube, be nice for us. Listeners, pray for us. Okay, so, Matt, it's the two of us on this episode, and we're talking about some cards that the year 2025 changed in the EDH format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you guys got to talk about all the data that you all collected last year, and I wasn't there because I don't play the game anything like you guys do. But that doesn't mean I don't get to participate in a conversation about some of the cards that had data changing over the course of 2025, because there were some spikes, even for some cards that we've known about for a long, long time. So we're going to take a moment to look at some of the cards that saw some pretty significant jumps up and kind of what might have caused those numbers to skyrocket the way they did.
Exactly. These are cards that we've identified that got a significant boost in their usage in the 99 because of some of the commanders that released in 2025, some of the things that were going on in that year. So we're going to show you some of the data of those important cards that spiked up, including the ones that just spiked but then faded, as well as the ones that spiked and held that position, which I think is the most interesting.
Well, and feel like we need to start off and say, once again, thank you to our Julia, who's our data scientist that works over EDHREC. Once again, she's just put all this amazing information together for us. People love having all this data, and just it wouldn't happen without Julia.
You can check out our interview with her about new EDHREC features that she helped to implement, which of course we'll have that linked in the description. And the reports that she came up with for this episode are ones that calculate each card's average global usage in the 6 months before each commander was spoiled and in the months after they were spoiled. And she also went ahead and removed stuff that was too close to a Precon so that we're not too affected by the Precon effect. And then we get a bunch of data that is spoiled by Precons, which, can be an issue with trying to find
it's
really
a real
accurate
thing,
stuff. Yeah. And therefore, the end result of these reports is that we're going to see these cards that have achieved a more widespread global usage as a result of some commanders that were released in 2025. And one last thing, I also want to shout out a great article by Arno Gompertz, who has an article on EDHREC using a very similar data set. So we'll make sure that is also linked in the description if you want to check it out and get a even more comprehensive look at how the sets of 2025 impacted the EDH format overall. So check out those. But now let's get to some other data, starting with the cards whose global usage spiked up because of the commanders in 2025, but then eventually they crested back down.
Yeah, well, I'm sure people are anticipating us getting into talking about the actual cards here. So why don't we start off
what you did there.
with the card ley line of anticipation? Thank you very much, Joey.
I see what you did there.
And for everybody that's listening in audio format, head over to YouTube. We're going to have visuals for this because actually the way Julia was able to visualize a lot of these reports is actually super interesting. And so make sure you check out on YouTube and actually pay attention to the visual aids. But Leyline of Anticipation, that is the first card that we are going to talk about. It's that blue Leyline that lets you cast everything as though it had flash. It's a super powerful card. And it was hovering around 4.3% before Ishla was previewed, and somehow a soon-to-be top 5 commander of all time, maybe? It's at number 6, and it's weighing in really quickly. But it actually went down a little bit after Ishla was previewed, but then jumped up as soon as we saw Fire Lord Azula. So the chart for Leyline of Anticipation is actually very, very interesting.
Before Y'shtola was released, Leyline of Anticipation was showing up in like 4.3% of decks or so, but in the months after Y'shtola was released, despite it showing up in some of those decks, it actually went down to just 3.9% usage. But then when Firelord Azula came out, it jumped up to 5.9% usage globally. However, we are again talking about these spikes that faded down. In the months after Firelord Azula kind of hyped up this card, it's gone back down to 4% play across decks, which is pretty interesting for us to see. This is one of those spikes that did see some interest, and it's a really cool card, but I kind of wonder whether people were eager to try this card out, but eventually found as they were playing this deck that maybe they don't need it quite as badly as they thought they did initially when they first saw those commanders.
It is super interesting, but it's also, I want to point out to everybody out there, that's how powerful the popularity of Firelord Azula was. It's already number 42 of all time, which is a huge accomplishment for any commander. I mean, the ability for Firelord Azula to get into the top 50 as quickly as it did, that's just what drove that entire, like, it was so powerful that it saw the lifetime inclusion rate for a card like Leyline of Anticipation, which has been around for a long time, to spike up. And it's cooled down a little bit, like we said. There aren't going to be like 5,000 Firelord Azula decks being built every single week in perpetuity, like people have built their decks. But that still is worth shouting out that, man, Firelord Azula pushed it up, even though other cards and other commanders had depressed the numbers on Leyline for a little bit there.
Yeah, it is still showing up in about half of Azula decks, but we actually have done challenge the stats on these types of effects that maybe flash effects might actually not be as necessary in a well-constructed Azula deck as you initially think. And I feel like a little bit of that is being reflected here as people are tinkering around with these. And actually, one thing that I want to clarify here for folks who are looking at the graphs on screen, the colors on those graphs do correspond to like the usage of that commander across the entire card's usage. Like you can see that Azula is really responsible for playing the bulk of Leyline of Anticipation usage, but really pay attention to the black line on these graphs, because that small black line, the thin one, that is the one that represents the global usage of these cards. So while we're seeing with some spikes, some cards that are going up, but eventually returning to normal, later on in this episode, we'll see some cards that spike up and actually stay, and that black line is increasing over time to see that the card has actually truly been impacted. But we're just starting with some ones that went up initially, but eventually has started to teeter back down. In fact, I think that that's the most evident with our next graph here of a card that spiked up in the 99, but really fell right back down pretty immediately.
Yeah, you might say the impact of this card multiplied. So the card we're actually talking about is the Master Multiplied. This card saw an enormous explosion when it comes to its inclusion rate. It was only included in about 1.56% of decks out there. But then Deadpool comes along and it goes up to 8.2%. That is how powerful the impact of Deadpool was. We talked about how big of a deal Firelord Azula was. Well, Deadpool did that only and then some.
But then, as we can see on this graph, while it is a very good card for Deadpool, specifically in the months after Deadpool's released, as things have simmered again, now it's back to its basically pre-Deadpool numbers. Now the global usage of that card in the 99 is back to 2.1. So this is a very bespoke to this one commander. It did spike up, and we see this type of thing all the time. We see it for the card Temur Ascendancy in Ureni decks as well, for instance. A big spike, but it's a big spike for that commander specifically. And we just really wanted to draw a contrast between those. There are going to be a lot of these cards that spike up because they're so good for a specific commander, but that doesn't mean that the entire format has been changed as a result of them.
Well, Joey, I think both of these cards are really good examples of the commander itself didn't have the staying power to stay in the top 5 of every single week or every month. So the card by default also tailed off a little bit with the popularity because the commander didn't have the staying power there. So it's just kind of an association there that the card was only as good as the commander, or at least was getting played in as many more decks as the commander was being built. So once that commander kind of started to lose a little bit of its staying power, that's when you see that inclusion rate for the Master Multiplied, for Leyline of Anticipation, starting to drop down a little bit, just because the commanders, it needed another commander to kind of carry it throughout the rest of the year.
There's one final thing that I want to say before we get to the rest of our graphs, though. Just like as a PS, in case people are hearing numbers like 4%, that's not a lot. Like if you're interpreting that as some type of low number, let's remind ourselves that, for instance, with the Leyline of Anticipation example, it's seeing 4% of play across all eligible blue decks. There are 3.78 million blue inclusive decks in the EDHREC database. 4% of 3.78 million is 151,000 decks. So when we talk about changes of like going 4 up to 6 or 1 up to 8 or whatever, those little changes can actually represent a lot of brewing energy. For multicolored decks, obviously the pool is going to be a little bit smaller, but for monocolored decks, when you actually do see increases like that, it represents a whole lot of players that are tinkering around with those things. So when those things spike up, that's really interesting. It's good to see those. It's fascinating to see these. But the ones that spiked and then could hold that position, that's what we're the most interested in next. We wanted to provide this as a nice contrast, but now with the rest of the episode, I'm excited to see the ones that actually permanently changed. I think, though, we'll get to those after a couple of quick shout-outs.
Yeah.
Up first, this show is sponsored by Dragon Shield, makers of the finest, toughest, best sleeves on the market, and they were so confident in the quality of their sleeves that they sent a sleeved card to space and back. They even have a phenomenal card scanning app to help you catalog your collection. It's super fast and super accurate, and you can even make custom sleeves with Dragon Shield. I recommend checking out our EDHREC custom sleeves personally, and if you order from them in the link in the description, make sure to use code EDHREC in all lowercase for a discount. Again, that is linked below, code EDHREC all lowercase for a discount on your order. And thank you so much to Dragon Shield for sponsoring the show.
And if you'd like to support the show in other ways, you can do so by liking this video, subscribing on YouTube, subscribing to your local podcast app. That does help so much in helping other people see the episode as well and helps our channel to grow. But if you'd like to go over to patreon.com/EDHRECast, you can support us over there as well. And that's just a nice way for you to get yourself a little something in exchange for supporting us over on Patreon. So whether you want to see all of our historic challenges, stats, picks, you want to join our patron-only Discord, there's all that and more over at patreon.com/EDHRECast, including being able to go into the running for the patron shoutout of the week. So this week, we're going to give a very, very special shout out to Reed Williamson, who learned how to read the room and head over to patreon.com/EDHRECast. So Reed, thank you so much for all of your support, and just to the rest of our supporters over there as well. Just, we could not be doing the show without all of you, and we appreciate all of your support.
100%. Thank you so much, Reed. Okay, Matt, we talked about some cards that were used in the 99 a whole lot and which spiked up, but eventually they're falling back down. Now let's talk about some cards that were permanently altered by the advent of 2025. And I want to get to this next one. The card Varen, Voice of Duality in the 99 had a fantastic year. Like, we already know that that's a very powerful Izzet commander, doubling up your triggers that are caused by you casting spells. But that card showing up in the 99, it saw so many new homes over 2025 that it has really increased in play.
Well, it also helps that we saw some kind of busted commanders that fit the bill for what Varen kind of tries to enable. So before any of the big spikes that came out there, it was still showing up at about 4.5% of decks. Like, that's pretty respectable. It's a kind of what the numbers were for other cards that we were talking about earlier in the episode. But then along comes Vivi, the scourge of standard of every format that it's legal in. And that number just shot up. It went up 3% to over 7% inclusion rate. And that's significant by itself. But then Avatar came out, and then Varen saw another jump up. So Varen has stuck around so popularly now. It's showing up in over 10.5% of decks. And it's tailed off just a little bit since Avatar came out, but it's still in almost 9% of decks, which is absolutely silly. The card isn't new. Like, it's easy to manipulate some of those new cards that have come out, but Varen's been out around for a long time. It's a super popular card. It was a very powerful commander for a long time. It still is. So the fact that it's like able to still see these jumps up is very, very significant.
At the start of the year, we saw it showing up in things like Storm, Force of Nature, things like Bria decks, which are great homes for it. But then we got Vivi, amazing spellslinger. And then in the Avatar set, Firelord Azula, Firebending and copying spells, Varen copying those triggers. That's pretty darn cool. Sokka, Master Tactician, is actually another thing that we see on this graph, is responsible for a decent chunk of Varen's play as well. That's a commander that gives your entire team prowess. So Varen doubling up your prowess, hey, that's actually pretty cool as well. I do think in particular, the card Varen getting reprinted in the Shiko and Narset deck earlier this year really helped out with the accessibility for this card to be poised to have such a good year. So it finally got a little bit more accessible so that people could actually get their hands on it and then play them in all these fantastic homes.
Yeah, and still, just like, we haven't even mentioned how powerful of a card it is. I mean, we mentioned it was a popular commander, but yeah, doubling everything up, just it fills the bill for so many different commanders. Like, Vivi absolutely loves having his spellcraft triggers happen again. That's just what better than to have a broken thing happen twice whenever you do just anything. And so again, when you get the Avatar set that comes out, yeah, there's a lot of commanders here that just like all of a sudden shot it up again. Firelord Azula, another one of those. Iroh Grand Lotus. There's a lot of really, really good homes. Just anytime you have a wizard that cares about anything that's going to have a spellcraft trigger, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery and you do a thing, there's going to be so many commanders that just happen to love that effect. And so the fact that, like, yeah, like you said, Joey, it got reprinted to keep it a little bit cheaper and more accessible definitely helped out with those numbers too. Because if it wouldn't have gotten reprinted, I think it would have been a little less popular because it wasn't a cheap card for a while there.
That's for dang sure. Over the course of the year, it was seeing maybe 4.5% play, and it's ending at nearly 9% play.
Almost doubled.
It's pretty good.
Almost doubled its inclusion rate. Yeah. Well, let's get to the next one, because this is a card that I love putting in decks, but I'm also very glad to see other people love putting in their decks too.
Yeah, another one that had a fantastic year was the card Pure Steel Paladin. This is a 2-mana, double white, 2/2 human knight with whenever an equipment enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card, and Metalcraft, equipment you control have equip 0 as long as you control 3 or more artifacts. This one did get a reprint in, I believe, the Cloud Precon from earlier in this year, but Cloud was not the only place that wanted this card this year. Before the Final Fantasy set came out, Pure Steel Paladin was showing up in roughly 3.7% of decks that were eligible to play it. When Final Fantasy released, including with that reprint, it jumped up to 6.9%. Nice. And there were a couple of commanders that were responsible for that. Obviously Cloud, but also some commanders like the Mono White Cloud, Midgar Mercenary, and Lightning Army of One also wanted to play it in those decks too. So we see a bit of a bump on this graph as its global usage started to increase around that time.
Well, and this one is super impressive to me because Pure Steel Paladin, for one, has been around for a long time. It takes a lot of efforts to see significant raises in information and play rates like this because it was designed back in Mirrodin, Return to Mirrodin, whatever that set was called back then. So it's been around for a long time, but also like the power creep that has happened. There have been so many more cards printed since then, enabling equipment style decks. So for this to still be played, that's a huge deal.
Yeah, this feels like one of those equipment cards that was a little bit ahead of its time when it was printed. I think in New Phyrexia was where it first saw.
There it is.
But it was really starting to show off some of White's specialities, I think. Continuing this card's journey on this graph, as we see in the months after Final Fantasy, it was starting to trend back downwards as the cool energy of Cloud, of the other Cloud, of Lightning was starting to wane just a little bit. But at the end of the year, it's beginning to tail a little bit back up with the advent of some commanders like Sokka and Suki coming out, which cares about equipment, and Matt, one of your favorites, there's a new Noctis Heir Apparent card that came out as well that also cares a lot about artifacts. So these cards are beginning to reinvigorate just a little bit of extra energy to it. So equipment decks had a great year. Kind of no surprise. It was a whole archetype across the Final Fantasy product, but it's not like it was just that one thing. Pure Steel Paladin also got other homes even at the end of the year, which has given it a nice little surge as we can see a slight drift upwards across this graph.
Well, and just that slight drift up is because the decks that really do want this, they love having this type of effect. Like you said, 90% of both of the Cloud decks included Pure Steel Paladin. And granted, it came in the Precon, so that also helps its numbers. But 61% of Lightning decks, 78% of the Noctis Heir Apparent decks, which that one came out at the very end of the year, but also was enough to make a significant splash when it comes to keeping its numbers high. So I absolutely love this card. If you're playing equipment decks, you just want this card. And the fact that it is so important like it is really lends itself to having a ton of staying power like we're seeing, where it's 15 years after its first printing, it still is able to see 5% plus inclusion.
Don't say 15 years. Don't make me feel old like that, man. That card's not that old, right?
It's been a while. It's seen some days. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, as well as Jin Sakai is another one that I forgot to mention here. Jin Sakai, Ghost of Tsushima. That's another commander that's also using it that came out a little bit at the tail end of the year. 43% of those decks are using Pure Steel Paladin. 79% of Sokka and Suki decks. The Pure Steel Paladin cards started the year at roughly 3.7% usage, but it's ending the year at 5.5%, which again may not sound like a whole lot, but we're talking about hundreds of thousands of decks in those numbers when they shift around.
Yeah, when it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you consider there's millions of decks being built every single year, then a percent or two is hundreds of thousands of decks, and that is significant.
All right, Matt, let's get to one more graph before we hit challenge the stats. This next one is honestly one of my favorite stories of the year. The card Frantic Search had a fantastic year. This is, I think, my favorite graph of the ones that we're going to be going over in this episode. It may not look like much at first, but dang, Frantic Search had one heck of a 2025.
I mean, it's had one heck of a career. It's been around longer than the format Commander has been around. But yeah, Frantic Search is just a card that I try to put it in pretty much any blue deck I build. And you can see that in the graph here that we're going to show. It started the year at 12.6%. That is a huge, huge number. It's the highest of any cards that we've already talked about. It's in over 500,000 decks. That's a ton when you consider the almost 4 million decks that are out there that it can be played in. So already included in a ton of decks out there. And its biggest spike throughout the year. It got up to 18% of decks over the course of the year.
Yeah.
That's enormous. Almost 1 in 5 blue decks out there are playing Frantic Search. Now, it did have the benefit of getting included in some precons, but like I said, we adjusted the numbers a little bit for there. But any deck that wants Frantic Search really, really wants Frantic Search. It's like a Pure Steel Paladin type of play where 70% of Hashaton players out there are playing Frantic Search. Over half of the decks out there playing Ishtula are playing Frantic Search. 57% of Vivi decks. Like if you're playing a blue deck, you just want to be considering this anyways because it's effectively a free spell. You draw 2, discard 2, untap 3 lands for 3 mana. If you're doing things right, there's a ritual effect to it. There's so many things that are going on for Frantic Search. And man, it's just every single set that came out this year has a commander that really wants that type of effect for whatever reason it is.
That's the thing for me. Nearly every set that came out in 2025 cared about this card in some way. Hashaton, filling your graveyard. Ishtola, this is a thing that resets your mana and triggers your commander. Norman Osborn, even from the Spider-Man set.
Yeah.
You're discarding cards with Frantic Search, and that feeds into the Mayhem ability.
Yeah.
And then, of course, at the end of the year, we got cards like Iroh Grand Lotus, which also wants you to have a big graveyard full of lessons that he can flash back for you. And Firelord Azula. When you copy this and you're untapping lands multiple times, that's giving you mana.
Speaking of ritual effects, yeah.
Yeah, Frantic Search had a great year where nearly every single set cared about it. So it started the year at 12.6% and it's ending the year at 16% total. You know, it spiked up to 18 and has drifted down a little bit, but this card's just getting better and better, just aged so gracefully. So what a journey.
It was a huge journey, yeah. And it's cool too that every one of these commanders that we mentioned, it's doing something just a little bit differently, but still fulfilling what that commander needs.
Yeah.
That's how flexible Frantic Search is. And this isn't even considering all the other decks out there that just want it because it's just generically a very good card. Mm-hmm. Being able to, like I said, effectively be a free spell because you get to untap those 3 lands that you're assuming tapping that to get the mana to cast a spell. But then you're sculpting your hand, you're doing a lot of things. Yeah, it makes sense why you want cards like Hashaton that's going to be discarding things. You want Norman Osborn for Mayhem. You want Firelord Azula to get those things in the graveyard. But then Vivi and Ishtola, you get to cast spells effectively for free.
Ping, ping.
That's just such a powerful, powerful effect. And yeah, I would wager that's also why Frantic Search has just been around for so long. And it's been included in so many decks for so long because we're always getting this. It wasn't just 2025 that we got a lot of commanders that want these different things. We're always getting commanders that want these types of things. Like there's always going to be spell casting, spell slinger type of commanders out there. There's always going to be graveyard commanders out there. And so Frantic Search just is one of those cards that has stood and I believe will continue to stand the test of time.
Yeah, it is a good card that got even better over the year. And as you said, it nearly showing up in like almost a fifth of decks that play blue were playing it this year.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be ignored. There are a lot of cards that are like consistent mainstays. We always know to expect, the Swords to Plowshares-esque type of cards to show up.
Yeah.
But this is one that actually shifted, and it was very interesting to see. And I then can't help but wonder whether a bunch of commanders in this coming year will have a similar effect to it, or what other cards might rise as a result of that. But this was an impact really worth celebrating. Mm-hmm. Matt, I think before we get to too many other graphs, we got to pause and challenge the stats. This has been really interesting data to go over, but there's a bunch of other data to acknowledge as well. Some of it that we don't entirely agree with. Let's talk about some over and underplayed cards on Challenge the Stats. Guess what? Our favorite deck builder, Architect, just released a really cool new feature, uploading custom cards. A lot of folks like to homebrew or invent cards for house rules or just test out their own game designs, and Architect now has a place where you can customize your own card, name, cost, types, text box, and put it right into your deck, where it will be treated just like any other card would. You can make a card that is totally blank or upload your very own custom image of your custom card. And yes, when you make your designs, not only will they count towards all of your deck's stats, such as tracking things like your mana curve, your pips, your types, to make sure that all of the stats of your deck are accurate, to make sure you're getting the very best deck information, but also all the designs that you invent or upload are usable in the Architect playtester, which is of course the very best playtester in the biz. What's really exciting is that this new feature has also laid the groundwork for Architect to support uploading alters of cards too. So if you want to upload your own custom images of pre-existing cards, the fine folks at Architect have even more stuff cooking. So let them know if that's something that you'd like to see in the future. Check out our deck lists at architect.com/EDHRECast to keep up with all of our brews and try making your own custom cards while you're at it. That's archidekt.com/EDHRECast.
Okay, Joey, let me get us started then with challenge stats this week. So I have our listener submitted challenge, and our user in Discord, Moj, who we've actually gotten to meet a few times at Magic Cons. It's always nice getting to see them. Had a really, really good challenge this week for just one of those cards it's not very often we get like strictly better upgrades, but this is one that isn't quite strictly better, but it's one that's pretty significant in a way that I think a lot of folks should be latching onto. So the card they're challenging is Colossal Majesty. It's a card that showed up a while back, and it says 2 and a green for an enchantment at the beginning of your upkeep. If you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you draw a card. Well, we have a version now that's quite a bit better, if not strictly better. It's Master's Guidance. So the challenge then is not only do you no longer have to wait for your upkeep to draw the card, but Master's Guidance also gives you a way to get to power 4 or greater thresholds. While neither of these enchantments are amazing for card draw, with the release of Master's Guidance, you can officially put the nail in the coffin for Colossal Majesty. So Master's Guidance is also 2 and a green for an enchantment, but has the added ability of whenever you attack with 2 or more legendary creatures, you put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target attacking creatures, and then at the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature power 4 or greater, you draw a card. So having cards that have the ability to fuel themselves to get to the payoff, that is what we absolutely love. You're kind of combining 2 effects into one versus the standalone Colossal Majesty that only lets you draw a card. And the big distinction that Moj pointed out here, where Colossal Majesty, you have to sit down and wait an entire turn cycle for you to draw a card because it's at the beginning of your upkeep, versus you can play Master's Guidance, get the attack trigger, fuel itself, and then at the beginning of the next end step is when you draw the card. So you're able to get that payoff significantly quicker as well. So there's a lot of nice things to like about this. Master's Guidance is not an expensive card at all. So if you're looking to replace Colossal Majesty in those types of decks, Master's Guidance is just a great upgrade over Colossal Majesty. And it's not even like Colossal Majesty is an unpopular card either. It's showing up in over 100,000 decks. So if you are one of those over 100,000 people out there, definitely give Master's Guidance consideration over Colossal Majesty, because I can't think of any reason why you would run Colossal Majesty but not Master's Guidance.
Yeah, I love this challenge, Moj. And Matt, when was the last time that you wanted to play Colossal Majesty? Like, just fully being honest.
Not very often, but Master's Guidance, I at least could see myself playing it because the timing restriction. I don't love playing things that happen at the beginning of your end step where you have to hope that it survives an entire turn cycle. I just don't consider those cards very often. They have to be very, very good for me to do that.
Real quick, you said you don't love end step, but you meant you don't love stuff on the upkeep, having to wait for that.
Yeah.
Cool. Just clarifying. I feel the same way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Master's Guidance is one that I'm like, ooh, I want to find a home for these because I think it's a good card and it just feels a lot more intuitive. So I love this challenge. Great one, Moj. Great pick. All right, for my challenge, let's talk about Hearthhole the World Seed, the Jund Space Station Precon commander that has 16,000 decks to its name and is already ranked number 66 commander of the past 2 years. Powerful Precon, this one. But in this deck, I want to challenge a card that came in that Precon, and that is Mazarek Kral Death Priest. I want to challenge it as potentially being a little bit unnecessary for this list when you're upgrading it. Mazarek is a 5-mana 2/2 Golgari insect that puts a +1 counter on your team whenever anyone sacrifices a permanent. And normally, I love that. I love Mazarek. He's in my signature Baba list even. Like, I think that this is a great card. However, I think he's a smidge unnecessary in this particular deck in Hearthhole because of Hearthhole's specific relationship with its win condition. Hearthhole's got a lot of traditional landfall win cons in the 99. Omnath Locus of Rage, Scoot Swarm, Titania, Baloth Prime, things that are making a bunch of huge tokens, and they're good enough on their own. Mazarek powering those things up when Scoot Swarm's already made a billion things for you feels a smidge unnecessary. Omnath Locus of Rage, 5/5 tokens, and Titania's 5 power tokens, you're going to sacrifice enough stuff in that deck to get a whole lethal army of them anyway. Mazarek ends up being just a little bit win more in this deck because it's amplifying cards that are already good on their own, rather than Mazarek's use in a lot of other places where sacrificing stuff creates an army and makes a thing that wasn't significant into something significant. Hearthhole's win conditions are already significant on their own. So if you are looking to cut some cards from this deck, maybe because, for instance, you want to make room for like new earthbending cards or things like that, I think that Mazarek might be worth a more critical eye. I don't know that it's as necessary in Hearthful as it is in a bunch of other types of decks, so I'm going to challenge that one as being just a little bit overplayed.
Yeah, I really like that call there, Joey. So if you would like to get your hands on these cards that we talked about in Challenge the Stats, or just any cards in general, make sure you check out cardsphere.com. It has been our favorite way to get cards. I've been acquiring so many of the Chocobo Track basic lands from the Chocobo foils. Oh, Joey, I don't know if you've seen those in person. Oh my goodness. I've been getting so many of it. My wife thinks I have a problem because I'm getting like so many little packages of everybody sending them to me. But it's all gone through Cardsphere. And so if you want to get your hands on Chocobo Track foils, if you want to get your hands on just anything out there, cardsphere.com is the best way to do it. And if you head to cardsphere.com/EDHRECast, it lets them know that we sent you over there and you can get trading today.
Heck yeah. Okay, Matt, let's get to some more of these graphs.
Yeah.
Our next card here, another one that had a great year that was very influenced by the cards and the sets of 2025. This one's Annie Joins Up. This is a 3-color Naya card that doubles the triggers of your legendary cards. And surprisingly, this had a lot of great new homes that influenced its play across all of 2025. It started off in the months before a bunch of the cool sets of this year being at like 12-ish% of decks, which is a high amount. Again, this is a multicolored card, so there are fewer decks that can play it. Most of its play, honestly, was being carried by like the 5-color Joda and Voya decks, which both play Annie Joins Up in 45% or more of their lists. But then a bunch of other sets came out this year that made it peak up to 18% usage.
Yeah, the big one being the big, powerful Toph, the first metal bender from the Avatar set. That one gave it a pretty significant bump up there where it's being played in almost half the decks. 49% of Toph decks are playing Annie Joins Up. But just anytime you get to double anything and do things another time, it's a very, very powerful effect. And being 3 colors does limit it quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But anytime you have one of those eligible commanders, boy, you really do want to consider this. So yeah.
Well, and it's not just Toph. There were some commanders earlier in the year that also helped begin that push.
Yeah. Tifa, martial artist, absolutely loves this, and it's being seen in 57% of Tifa decks. Even Miles Morales saw a pretty significant adoption of that, and it wasn't a super popular commander, but still 44% of any kind of commander that's worth mentioning there. So yeah, it just saw a few nice little bumps throughout the year, but Toph First Metal Bender, that one jumped up and was one of the most popular commanders from the Avatar set, so that's definitely a huge, huge boost. And yeah, getting into, again, peaked at 18% before it started to tail down a little bit, but still ended up high at 16% of decks. Like Annie Joins Up saw a really, really good year.
One of my favorite things about this graph is also the small entry of a couple of other 5-color commanders that were flirting with this one as well. Yeah. You can see a little bit of a section of the new Heibai Forest Guardian, which can help find you shrines. You see a little bit of Infinite Guideline Station on this as well, which cares about you having a bunch of multicolored permanents. So that's just a nice little extra flair that I appreciate. But yeah, there were a handful of Naya or 5-color commanders that were really interested in the ability to double up your legendary triggers. And since we're getting so many legends in every set nowadays, it feels like one of those cards that's only going to go up and up and up in each of these commanders' estimations. So good for you, Annie Joins Up. You're on the way up.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a card that had a couple of sets over the year. You know, Final Fantasy, Spider-Man, Avatar, all had commanders that pushed up the inclusion of that one. Let's go now, though, to a card that spiked up and has relatively maintained most of its hold just because of one set. That is Harmonic Prodigy. This is a red creature for 2 mana that doubles up your Wizard and Shaman triggers. And this one ate really good when the Final Fantasy set came out.
Well, yeah, because there were 2 kind of bonkers wizards that came out. I mean, we've mentioned Vivi several times over the course of this episode. Vivi caused a lot of cards to see some resurgences, and Harmonic Prodigy is definitely one of them. But the deck that Harmonic Prodigy is actually being played more than in Vivi decks is Kuja decks, which is the Grixis wizard that you obviously want to be doubling up all your triggers on as well. Then there's also Kefka Court Mage. So there was 3 pretty impactful Final Fantasy commanders that saw over 58% of play for Harmonic Prodigy. That's 3 times like within a very, very short time span. And if you look at the graph here, it's like coasting along, it's doing okay, doing its thing. And then bam, it's just a double whammy where like there's one jump and it keeps that jump going on for a few months. And then it sees another jump again because once people finally started getting their hands on a pretty expensive Vivi card, then they were able to build more of those decks. So yeah, this chart is wild, and you see 2 jumps from the same set.
Yeah. And before Final Fantasy came out, it was showing up in a respectable 3.7% of all decks that could play Harmonic Prodigy. So, all red decks.
Yeah.
But then during Final Fantasy, it eventually went up to 8.8% at its spike. But here's the thing, in the months after the spike, it's still hovering around 5%. So it has been altered. The thing that is one of my favorite details about this graph is that before Final Fantasy came out, we saw a nice slight amount of use for commanders like Inala, of course, a lot of wizards there, or Nekusar the Mind Razor as well. But as the rest of the year went on, something fascinating is like the small red slice that represents Nekusar also started to increase again. It almost feels as though the Harmonic Prodigy getting so much use in Vivi Ornithir, in Kefka, in Kuja, kind of reminded folks, hey, yeah, it's actually also really good in all these other commanders too that happen to be wizards, that happen to be shamans. So it kind of did a little bit of a kickstart, a little bit of a reminder for folks for other commanders too, and put some respect on Harmonic Prodigy's name.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been a good card ever since it was first printed. I think price for a little bit there was a factor. It's gotten a little bit more love, but yeah, it's a really powerful card, folks.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting to map this graph onto the price graph for Harmonic Prodigy. It definitely saw a surge in price as people realized, oh wait, this has a bunch of really great homes, huh?
Yeah. Well, Joey, let's get into our next category here, which is fresh spikes. So these have happened fairly recently, and we're not sure if they're going to fade or not, but we do want to keep an eye on them because there's a few cards here that we definitely want to mention because they're all still powerful cards, and they're getting another breath of life into how many people are playing them.
Yeah, these are the ones where it's hard for us to be entirely sure whether we should permanently readjust our expectations of where we're going to expect this card to see play and how often it should see play. And this is because the sets that affected it the most were namely like Avatar, and that's so recent that we don't have the full 6 months before and the full 6 months after that we used for the rest of the graphs that we looked over. So one that we'll look at here is going to be the card Ashaya, Soul of the Wild. Specifically, again, this is Ashaya within the 99, not as a commander. And this is the mono green 5-mana creature that turns all of your creatures, your non-token creatures, into lands as well. And this was pretty impacted by all of the earthbending cards from the Avatar set. Before Avatar came out, Ashaya was showing up in like roughly 3% of decks that could play it. But when Avatar released, it jumped up to 6.5% of decks that could play it. So things like Boomy and the Toffs were making that play rate go up and up and up. But there haven't been enough months for us to tell whether or not that's going to hold or whether that's going to drift back down.
Well, and it got a little bit of a boost earlier in the year. Tifa Lockhart decks came out, and Tifa absolutely loves having a bunch of lands entering the battlefield. So Ashaya turning all your creatures into forests.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of synergy there. I'm building a Tifa deck right now, and I've definitely considered Ashaya there. So,
heck yeah.
So yeah, Tifa has about 23% of decks playing Ashaya there. But yeah, the Boomy decks out there, the Toph decks out there that absolutely just, they care so much about all the earthbending they're doing. They want to be able to put +1/+1 counters on all their creatures. Ashaya has a natural home there. So I think that this bump here, if I had to predict, it's going to go down a little bit because we're not going to get earthbending every single set unless there's more land synergies that we just don't know about yet. But I am glad to see this get another shot of life because Ashaya is a super powerful card. But if I had to predict, like I said, I don't know if this one's going to be a lasting one or not.
Unfortunately, I agree, but I do hold out hope regardless. Like, we've already seen it begin to drift down to like 5.4% from its peak at 6.5. I would anticipate it also goes down because it is so bespoke to the land synergies.
Yes.
And like, we didn't see it spike up when the Hearthhole Precon came out, when there were a bunch of landfall synergies earlier in the year with Edge of Eternities. It only spiked when earthbending stuff came out. So yeah, I agree. That said, though, at least to speak from my own personal experience, I reevaluated my relationship to Ashaya this year because seeing it in play just a little bit more often in these types of decks and seeing it make your board Cyclonic Rift proof because it hits non-lands and Ashaya turns yourself into lands.
I've been hoisted on that one.
Yeah.
I've been caught by that synergy. That really, really hurts. And it's happened actually more times than I would have predicted.
Yeah, that's just it. It made me reevaluate this card. So even if this spike is probably going to fade back down, it gave me a renewed appreciation for it that makes me feel like I should consider this for more places because of those extra type of neat synergies that this reminded me of and it re-energized me for. So this is worth mentioning as a spike that is so fresh, it probably will fade, but I do want to keep an eye on. So I do
think that I want to add in, though, If there's a card that's likely to spike again, it probably is going to be a Shia, just because we always are getting landfall synergies. We're always getting cards that care about lands entering the battlefield. It's just one of the most basic resources of the game. So yes, I don't think this specific spike will last, but I do think that every now and then there's the potential for a card to come out there and a Shia is going to see how much synergy there is and spike up again.
The other ones that we want to end on here, these are two more graphs that relate to Firebending. So the cards Leyline Tyrant and Ashling Flame Dancer are both cards that can hold on to your red mana. They'll keep that in reserves. And they saw a spike in play because of all of the Firebending cards making red mana when those Firebenders attack from the Avatar set. They each started at either 1 or 1.6% play at the beginning-ish of the year, but they peaked up to 3.2 and 4.9% respectively, because of commanders like Azula and Ozai and Zuko, which have firebending abilities that then these cards can hold on to that red mana for you. Ashling is showing up in 38 to 40% of those decks, and Leyline Tyrant is showing up in 57 to 60% of Zuko and Ozai decks. So they did see a spike, but these also feel pretty specific to only caring about Firebending as a mechanic. I can't see this spike lasting.
I definitely don't see the spike lasting, just because Ashling and Leyline Tyrant both are doing the thing that Firebending decks need the most, which is preservation of that mana they're generating. If they're not able to use that mana from the Firebending ability at instant speed, you lose all that mana. And so being able to shore up that specific interaction of you're getting mana in the combat step, I definitely do not see this lasting. Like, Ashaya had potential. Unless we're getting a weird Firebending mana caring about interactions here, it requires new mechanics to do something very, very specific. Whereas, like we said with Ashaya, you're getting something fundamental that's interaction with lands. So this spike 100% is not going to last at all.
An interesting thing to observe here too is that Leyline Tyrant is showing up in a high amount of Zuko and Ozai decks, but it is not seeing play in Azula decks. And compare that against Ashling, which is showing up in a decent amount of all three of those commanders. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's kind of a sign that, unfortunately, even these effects in decks that do have Firebending might not care about it quite as much as you feel. To use Zuko as an example here, Zuko does have a nice Firebending ability, however big he is, he'll Firebend for that much. But when I was tinkering around with that deck, we had a whole episode upgrading it, I found that the ability of playing stuff from exile and getting +1 counters on your team was a lot more rewarding to play around than Firebending specifically was in that deck. So this feels to me like we're kind of coming full circle back to the Leyline of Anticipation. These are cards that initially look really exciting with those abilities, but over time, even within those decks, might start to dwindle as well. So that's really what I wanted to point out with these. It's not even that the global usage of these cards is going to fade. Even usage in some of these decks might fade as well, as they might end up not being quite as good as you initially thought.
Well, I think the big reason that Leyline Tyrant specifically isn't showing up in Firelord Azula decks, whereas Ashling is that added synergy that Ashling has when it comes to being able to have the Magecraft ability, where when you cast instant sorcery spells, you get these abilities. Whereas Leyline Tyrant has the death triggers that's going to get you a whole bunch of mana. That one is a little bit differently and just specifically doesn't interact with Azula near as favorably as Ashling does. So I do think that's probably going to be the reason
that's a good point.
Why Ashling is showing up in significantly more. And it's not that Leyline Tyrant is not played at all in Firelord Azula, but you're seeing 57%, 59%, all the way down to 8.1% with Firelord Azula. So it is a significant drop off from the first two with Firelord Zuko and Ozai.
Yeah, that's very good context.
So Joey, I guess I have a question then. Do you have any cards that you thought maybe we're going to see a bigger spike because of some of the sets that are coming out, or any mechanics even that you were kind of anticipating that were going to have a better impact than they did?
Yeah, that's a great question. Stuff that I expected because of the sets would therefore take past cards and make them surge up, but we didn't see any spike at all. I think one that I was probably anticipating some amount of movement to occur around was probably the mobilize mechanic from Tarkir. That's the mechanic. Yeah. Whenever the creature attacks, you create X tapped and attacking 1/1 red warrior creature tokens, and then you sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step. It's a really interesting, very neat mechanic. You're making bodies, tokens decks are going to love that. The tokens are going to die. Aristocrats decks are going to love that. You're sacrificing them. There are a bunch of cards that care about that too. So I think I maybe anticipated seeing some type of bump up for the cards like Mayhem Devil that do damage when you sacrifice things, or tokens decks or aristocrats stuff. But that is obviously, in retrospect, a little bit silly to expect these oceans to be affected by a couple of new drops of water. because like, truly, though, like tokens decks, aristocrats decks are so jam-packed already that nothing is going to move them so much one way or the other. So mobilized cards are cool, but they didn't end up having a big, long-lasting impact on any of those sections. But that's probably one that I like was holding my breath for, and then it turns out I was holding my breath for kind of a long time, unfortunately.
I think for a long time.
Yeah.
Well, and jam-packed is absolutely right, because it's not even that like they have so many things that are going on already. They also have so many options for what they are already doing too. So it's like it takes a lot to break in. I think that's kind of why it's so significant that Ashaya was able to make an impact on there, because there's a million things that have to do with lands. So but at the same time, token decks, they have so many options. Aristocrats also there's so many things out there that are dealing with it. Mm-hmm. I can see why it looks really cool. It reads like a really good mechanic, and you are sacrificing those tokens too as part of Mobilize's ability. So I see what's going on there though.
Yeah. Well, and Ashaya, even like it's not just any old landfall set that made Ashaya move. It's dealing with lands in a specific way that made Ashaya move and made us reevaluate it. So yeah, that's one for me. Are there any for you that you expected, like, oh, these things from 2025 might make this surge, but then no surge actually occurred?
I have a whole class of cards that I would say I was a little more hopeful for. And I know I tried to put it in a few other decks, but not for the specific reasons I thought it was going to jump up. But we had Final Fantasy, which had a bunch of sagas that were going on in there. Yeah. And back when I had my Tom Bombadil deck, cards like Scholar of New Horizons were absolutely super, super powerful because of the counter manipulation on those sagas. Because every single turn, you're putting those counters on the saga, you're having the next chapter occur. And so Scholar of New Horizons being types of cards that are able to remove those counters, keep the sagas on the battlefield longer, and then also being able to replay those chapters over and over again.
Right.
You have cards like Thrall Parasite that also do this. I know that we actually did get a card that kind of fills this category with Owaka, Traveling Merchant, but Power Conduit. And Power Conduit I know did jump up a little bit. It never was super cheap. But I was expecting those types of cards to have a little bit bigger of an impact because of the huge emphasis that was going on with sagas. And I know in my Noctis Prince of Lucis deck, that's all about replaying artifacts from the graveyard. They have those finality counters on there. So I want to take the finality counters off. That's what I was using it for, but I also had that saga deck. So yeah, I guess I was kind of expecting those to have a little bit bigger of an impact because there are a lot of type of permanents out there in the game that wanted you to take those counters off. And so the cards that were able to manipulate like that, I guess I was expecting it to do a little bit more, but it never came to fruition.
Yeah, those cards didn't move, but
didn't move at all.
That's a really good point. It feels like a class of card that could be poised to move, though. Like that's something that we should also continue to keep our eyes on for future mechanics.
Yes. Yeah. Anytime we get a mechanic that just, again, it puts a counter on there. And I mean, maybe with Lorwyn, because we are getting Persist, we're getting -1/-1 counters again. So maybe there's a chance that a commander pops up with Lorwyn that's coming out. So I don't know, it's something very interesting to see because counters is a very, very common mechanic that we get.
Yeah, that's a really good pick. All right. A lot of stuff to keep our eye on. A lot of movement that happened over 2025. These are the cards that moved the most. Some of them went back down. And some of them actually stayed a really interesting course that does force us to re-engage with them, force us to reevaluate them. And it's nice to see small currents as they change in the vast ocean that is EDH.
Yeah.
This has been super fascinating. Thank you once again to Julia Maddalena for putting these reports together. This is such fascinating, interesting stuff. And we've got to hear from our listeners out there too. What other cards out there do you think also saw some small surges? Maybe they didn't spike up quite as much to register in this data, but what other things out there did you observe that may have shifted over time and that 2025 changed the trajectory of those cards in your estimation? Let us know. Matt, thank you for joining me on this one. But with that, I think we are going to call this episode to a close. So if listeners want to get a hold of us online, where is it that they can find you?
So you can find me on pretty much any social media platform, whether it's Blue Sky, Instagram, anything like that. It's all going to be the same handle, @Mathimus55. And don't forget, we are so happy to go into 2026 working with Dragon Shield once again. That's the best way to protect all of our cards. It's the best way to protect all of your cards. So if you want to see the new Landfall series and more, the new releases they have coming up this year, head over to Dragon Shield and make sure to use code EDHREC when you check out to get yourself a nice little discount too.
And you can find me everywhere online, from Instagram to Blue Sky at Joseph M. Schultz. And of course, you can find the cast online at EDHRECast. And if you want to get some new cards to spiff up all of your decks, consider checking out cardsphere.com/EDHRECast to get a whole bunch of fantastic stuff, including things like Chocobo lands, which clearly Matt is a total fiend
Clearly
for.
the best lands that have ever come out ever.
Listeners, we'll be back at you next week with more data and insights. But until then, remember, EDHREC your deck before you wreck your deck.